Diapedesis is the movement or process as to how cells, especially the leukocytes, move through the vessel walls into the surrounding tissue. So let's just draw the skin here where an injury has occurred, and there's tissues underneath the skin and many blood vessels around, which because of the injury and inflammation has dilated and increased its permeability. I will just draw one opened vessel so we can see how the diapedesis process works. So when an injury occurs, bacteria comes inside the body from the outside, and the immune response and inflammatory response begins. The phagocytes, such as the macrophages which resides under the skins in the tissues, bind to these foreign pathogens, in this case a bacteria, and begin secreting pro-inflammatory cytokines and other cytokines, which attracts more immune cells to the area, attracts more leukocytes, and also activates the receptors on the vessel walls, so that the immune cells can cross over more professionally. Mast cells secrete histamine, and if you remember, it causes vasodilation and increases vascular permeability, so that again, the immune cells and other proteins can easily pass through the vessel walls. Another important thing also, that because the surrounding area is inflamed due to the inflammatory mediators and the accumulation of immune cells, the endothelial cells in the inner surface begin expressing receptors, which allows more immune cells to be brought to the injured area. And some of these receptors expressed are actually activated by the pro-inflammatory cytokine, which are secreted by the tissue macrophages, as mentioned before. So the process how the immune cells go from the blood vessels to the tissue is called a diapedesis, and consists of about 4 to 5 parts. So let's just say a neutrophil, with its 3-lobed nucleus, wants to go into the injured area to eliminate some bacteria if it can. Due to the activated endothelial cells and cytokines, the neutrophil firstly rolls on the inner surface of the vessel walls to get ready to enter. It then binds to a specific receptor along the way and begins slowing down. This process is called adhesion. It then still keeps rolling, but then is able to bind to 2 receptors and a cytokine. The neutrophil actually binds to more receptors, but we are only looking at the main ones. So once bind to these receptors and the cytokine, the neutrophil then can immigrate through the vessel wall, and this process as it passes through is called diapedesis. And once in the surrounding tissue, it has migrated, the migration process. So I would like to introduce some of these the cytokines and the receptors on the blood vessel endothelial cells. So again, we have the skin and tissues with an injured area, and the blood vessels. Bacteria begins infiltrating the body, and the blood vessel dilates and permeability increases. The tissue macrophages attack the pathogen and begin secreting cytokines, one of which is tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNFA, a pro-inflammatory cytokine. We talk about TNFA because it actually activates certain receptors on vessel endothelium, and remember that these endothelial cells in the injured area are inflamed, and so begin expressing these certain receptors. And now we will only look at 2 of these receptors, the 2 main ones, the categories of these receptors, and one of which is called the selectins, and the other is of immunoglobulin superfamilies. And these are a group of receptors. Now the tissue macrophages also secrete another cytokines, chemokines, during an immune response. Another important one for diapedesis is cytokine CXCL8, or simply interleukin 8, IL-8. Now interleukin 8 basically assists the new immune cells coming in by showing them the way to the injured area, because it's not easy being a small cell, finding a location in a massive human body. So let's just say a neutrophil binds to the selectin, the superfamily, and the interleukin 8. And this process is called the binding process. And now after the binding process, the neutrophil can then pass through the vessel wall and enter the infiltrated area full of bacteria. But remember, it has to bind to these receptors in order to pass through. Now we will look at these receptors, the endothelial receptors, in a bit more detail. And also I would like to introduce the receptors on the immune cells. Before I start, please remember that each immune cell, the monocytes, the basophil, the T cells, the neutrophils, have all different types of receptors, and so bind to different types of endothelial receptors, different types of selectins, different types of superfamily, immunoglobulin superfamily receptors. For this case, we will just look specifically on neutrophils, because neutrophils are the most abundant leukocyte and enters the injured area the quickest. So here we have a neutrophil with its 3 receptors. Again, it actually has many more receptors for this process, but these are just the main ones. Anyway, each immune cell, such as the neutrophil, has a special carbohydrate chain, which identifies them as that family of immune cells. This is actually not a receptor, it's more like an identity card and works like a hand in diapedesis process. The next one is the interleukin 8 receptor, the cytokine receptor. And the last one is a class called integrins, consisting of alpha and beta domains. Now there are actually specific names for each of these integrins, but we are just looking at the family name, the class name. Now let's see what these different neutrophil receptors bind to on the inflamed and activated endothelial cells. So here we have an activated and inflamed endothelial cell. Just a bad drawing. So the special carbohydrate chain on the neutrophil binds to the selectins. Now there are 2 major selectin classes, the E-selective and the P-selective. The cytokine receptor is straightforward. It binds to the interleukin 8 receptor from tissue macrophages to assist in passage. The integrin binds to the immunoglobulin superfamily, and there are many types of immunoglobulin superfamilies. All usually have a CAM in them. Now 2 important one is the ICAM1 and the ICAM2. Now let's just draw a blood vessel here again and see how it works for the last time, seeing we know the name of the receptors now. So here we have an activated E-selective receptor from the selectin family on the inflamed endothelial. So firstly, the neutrophil is rolling and then attaches momentarily to the E-selective receptor with its special carbohydrate chain. Now this process adhesion is then followed by the binding process, the tightly binding process, where the neutrophil binds to the interleukin 8 and the ICAM1 receptor with its interleukin 8 receptor and its integrin receptor. It still also binds to the E-selective receptor with its special carbohydrate. Now this binding process is then followed by the diapedesis process, the main process we're looking at. Now let's just quickly look at what the neutrophil do after diapedesis and after it's moving past the vessels. So here I'll draw a blood vessel again, and as the neutrophils pass through with the diapedesis process. So as it passes through, there are still interleukin 8 receptors in the area which were secreted by the tissue macrophages. So the neutrophils are able to bind to these cytokines and follow them to where the bacteria are situated. So here we have the interleukin 8 receptors, and here we have many interleukins which are secreted by the tissue macrophages after binding and attacking the bacteria. And so once these neutrophils are already in the tissue and out of the vessels, it is a migrated neutrophil, a leukocyte. So that concludes the diapedesis presentation. I hope that was okay. Please like and comment and subscribe if you want. Thank you. Bye.